So we are going to talk about esophageal strictures. Do you all see this? Okay, so there are two types of strictures that we usually see. We usually see corrosive strictures, which I don't think comes to you, and we see anastomotic strictures. So corrosive strictures depend on the injury. Usually if they are taking something which is acidic, especially pH less than 2, or something that is alkaline with a pH more than 12, it also depends on the concentration of the liquid or the poison that they've taken. The contact time, how much time it was in contact, amount that is ingested, and in which form they've taken. Whether they've taken solids or they've taken powder or they've taken liquids, it all depends on that. Solids, usually it's in the supraglottic oropharynx region. Powders are usually in the airway, the pharynx and the upper esophagus, and the liquids are more lower down and more circumferential injury. Here we do endoscopy. Initially, if he comes with a corrosive injection, ideally you should do an endoscopy within the first 2 days, maximum up to 4 days. This is just to assess the amount of injury that has taken place and what's the likelihood that he'll develop a stricture. It's just to determine the prognosis. If the child comes after 4 days, don't do an endoscopy, because then there is a chance that if you put in the scope, you may perforate. So then you wait till 21 days and then you do a scoping. Now when we do this scopy, we actually look at classification of the kind of damage that has taken place, and we use the Sargas classification. Why it helps us? Because anything that is more than 2B grade, there's a chance of almost 70% that there will be a stricture formation. And anything above 3 is almost 100% stricture formation. So this is the endoscopic finding and the grading. If you look at this first picture, you see there's little erythema. That's your grade 1. You can see these white ulcers, but they are discrete. That is grade 2A. You see these white ulcers, but they are circumferential. This is 2B. Severe necrosis, you can see those black patches that you are seeing. That is grade 3A, and extensive necrosis. The entire thing is almost like a black patch. That's your grade 3. These are the ones, the 2B and the 3A and the 3B, who are at a risk of developing a stricture. So the moment you see this kind of thing, you will be actually calling the patient again after 3 weeks to start seeing if he develops a stricture. If you wait too long for the symptoms to develop, by the time it's become more fibrotic, the response to dilatation is going to be a problem. So that's the reason why we do this first management. Now from the stricture management point of view, we always look at dilatation. Dilatation can be balloon or mechanical, that's your boogie. Mechanical, Savary-Gilyard gives you pressure, or that force that is there is longitudinal as well as radial. But the problem is that it's a tapering dilator. So the amount of force that is applied is not equal all throughout the stricture. So if you have a long length stricture, you may have a force that is more on the upper side and less on the lower side. So it's not a complete equal force everywhere. Balloons, they only give you radial force, but the force is equal throughout the balloon. So throughout the stricture, and it's a long length balloon, it's almost like a 5 centimeter balloon. So you get that force which is through the entire stricture. So in corrosive, we start 21 days after the corrosive poisoning, especially in your grade 2B onwards. And every time you do a dilatation, you wait for around 2 to 3 weeks and then gradually increase the dilatation size. If you do these corrosives later and then you try, by that time it's become fibrotic and you start doing dilatation, there's a high risk that you will perforate. What's the difference between the two? The perforation rate is something that is different between the two, because your balloon we are doing under direct vision, we can actually see what's happening. So the perforation rate is around 0 to 2%. Whereas with the mechanical dilators, it is around 8 to 9%, because you're doing it under C-arm and you actually don't know how much is the esophagus dilating, what's happening. Those are the problems. When would you dilate? It has to be symptomatic. So it has to be that the child has odynophagia, dysphagia, or in general, he was eating well, now the appetite has gone down and there has been weight loss. This is what happens mostly with most of the dilatations that we do. You've given them an appointment after 3 weeks for the next dilatation. By the time the child is coming for the next dilatation, 2 or 3 days prior, the amount of food has started going down. That's what the parents usually complain. So it's again started getting a stricture formation. How many number of sessions you will require to completely dilate, we don't know. Because most of them, the moment you dilate up to say 6, 8, 10, they stricture again, but not to the same extent. You may require in corrosive poisoning to dilate over a period of years to maintain adequate diameter. So in adults, they actually use stents. In children, we are not able to use stents because the size is not available to us. The other advantage when we do endoscopic is we apply intralesional steroids, or we can use intralesional mitomycin. Mitomycin at the moment we've not been using here because it's an off-label use, so we first need to get our ethics approval to start using mitomycin. We have been using intralesional steroids here to dilate our patients, and that is what is the advantage, because we can give that and the fibrosis that takes place post-dilatation does not occur. And then when we call it failure of dilatation, usually you call a resistant strictures when you tried 5 attempts of dilatation and the patient is back to square one and you've not been able to do, then you call it as resistant. When we have a resistant stricture, we try mitomycin. If that doesn't work, then we probably would ask the surgeons to come back and try something surgically. There have been instances where we have failed in dilatation, especially 1 or 2 corrosive poisonings where we failed. But the thing is, surgery also, when you do whatever you do, there is always a risk that wherever you're going to do anastomosis, there will be a stricture formation. So that is another problem. So there are lots of things that you can do. You can do local resection of the stricture. You can do a esophageal replacement. Most common that you all do is gastric pull-through. You can do a colonic interposition and jejunal. But all this has its own problems, and the most important is the stricture formation that takes place again. Then you have something known as congenital strictures that occur with your tracheoesophageal fistula or esophageal stenosis. Esophageal stenosis can be in the form of webs. The webs are usually in the upper 1/3, which are amenable to your dilatations. You have fibromuscular stenosis, which is in the mid 1/3, and then you have cartilaginous form, which is in the lower 1/3. The fibromuscular also you could still try dilatation, but when you have the cartilaginous one, you actually need to do something surgically. We had one patient where we kept on trying to dilate the one in the lower esophagus, and every time we dilated, there was no change that was occurring. And it was subsequently we thought that it was a fibrocartilaginous. We had sent that patient to you, if you remember, Mayank. Tracheoesophageal fistulas and esophageal atrasias, I don't need to go through this chart. All of you are aware about the types of tracheoesophageal fistula. So the commonest that you are going to see is this variety, the type 1, where the lower esophagus is connected to the trachea and the upper is a blind remnant. And the least one common is this one, where both are communicating with the trachea, and the H shape is the other one. I'm not going to go more into this because I don't know the surgical aspects of it, but what happens post-operative? Anastomotic leaks is one issue. Stricture formation, which is to the tune of 1/3 to half of the repairs. So all your TOFs that you see, almost half of them are going to have strictures. Do you see that kind of percentage? Okay, because this is from international data that I've removed that.
No, that
Yeah, okay. And then you could have recurrent tracheoesophageal fistulas. Most of these anastomotic strictures, they require repeated dilatations over a period of every 3 weeks for a period of 3 to 6 months. And if you have resistant strictures in TOF, you have to rule out gastroesophageal reflux disease. Other complications that you could see in TOF is going to be pulmonary issues, especially pneumonias, aspiration pneumonias, and dysmotility of the esophagus with GERD. 2 cases I want to show you all. This one, I'm not saying the name of the patient, it's just starting with J. 4th March last year, he was 18 hours old. He had mucoid vomiting and inability to pass the oral tube, and the X-ray showed coiling of the RT. 2D echo was normal. He was diagnosed as TEF. 2 days later, he was operated, underwent a right thoracotomy and ligation of the fistula with esophageal anastomosis. So he was fine for the next 6 months. Mother started weaning food. That's when she noticed that he is having problems with solids and semi-solids. A barium swallow was done and that showed a stricture. Can you all identify the stricture? Where is it? Upper 1/3, lower 1/3? So this is where your stricture is. You can see the dilatation of the proximal esophagus. And then he was referred to us for endoscopic dilatation in November 2019. So if you can see this, November, this is the first opening that you see. This is at 11 centimeters from the incisors and it's pretty narrow. So the first dilatation was done with a balloon at 8 millimeter. 3 weeks later, 5th December, we dilated up to 10 millimeter. The third one, we dilated up to 12 millimeter, and you can see the opening now. This is pre-dilatation, much better, and this is post-dilatation and where we've injected triamcinolone. Last one, we did this Thursday, and we've dilated him up to 13.5 millimeter. Again, we've injected triamcinolone here. The most important aspect when we see response to therapy is we ask the mother whether the child has started putting on weight. So if we feel that the child, and taking orally, most of these patients usually have a feeding gastrostomy. But the ones who are not having that, whether they are taking everything orally, can they tolerate semi-solids? Are they able to put on weight? That's our criteria. And then subsequently, probably this child will be stopping here. And then again reassessing after a few months whether what's happening with him, does he require a redilatation. So this was a child where we straight away started with balloon dilatation and we had a very good response to therapy. This is another child. He was born on 24th April and last year again, and he had secretions from the mouth. He was diagnosed as deaf, operated on day 7 of life. He had a stormy NICU stay. He required NICU stay for almost 40 days. He had a lot of pneumonias, Acinetobacter. He also had a large PDA. 4th May, a first mechanical dilatation was done. July, he had vomiting. A second mechanical dilatation was done up to 20 franc. 5th August, he again had vomiting. Third dilatation was done with a mechanical dilator, 26 franc. But within 3 weeks of 5th, again he came back on 24th August with refusal of feeds and cough, and this time he had to get admitted in the PICU. From 24th August, this child is in the hospital, okay, and he's been in and out of the PICU. A fourth dilatation was done after 2 days. So barium swallow was done on 30th. There's no reflux, but you can see this stricture over here. 23rd September, a 5th dilatation was done and a feeding gastrostomy was put. He had recurrent aspiration pneumonias. He was oxygen dependent. 3rd October, a bronchoscopy was done. There was no leak from the tracheoesophageal site, and CT chest showed extensive areas of consolidation, bilateral lung. November, weight was 3.2 kilos. So he's born in April. November, it's almost 6 months now, weight is 3.2, and that was the time when he was referred to us for endoscopic dilatation with the 5 previous mechanical dilatations done. 14th November, we took him up and you can see this opening, extremely narrow. That means, you've seen the first child, I showed you the picture, it was not that bad. But this one is extremely narrow. That tells me that the first mechanical dilatations didn't work. It's a resistant stricture. So this child, we were very, very careful and we didn't go too fast. So we went only to 7 millimeters in the first sitting. And this child, we took him up every week. We didn't wait for 3 weeks. So 14th November, then we took him up at 21st November. We went up to 8. 28th November, we went up to 10. 19th December. Between this time to this time, he again had a pneumonia and he had to go to the PICU. So we could not take him up immediately, so we had to wait for that to settle. 19th, he had again reclosed, so we had to go back to 10. 26th December, we went up to 12 and we injected triamcinolone. And again, last week we've done on Thursday, and we've gone up to 13 with injection triamcinolone. And you can see the opening now, which is much better. I think it's not that clear on the slide, but the opening is much better. What is the outcome? So we have done around 6 dilatations. And outcome wise, he's been off oxygen. He was oxygen dependent right from August onwards. He's off oxygen after the 4th dilatation. He's on oral feeds, which was not possible since the time of August. He was just on feeding gastrostomy. So now he's taking orally from 8th of Jan, and he's put on weight from November to now. So he's put on around 1.3 kg. So this is the response that we've seen with this patient. So this is what I wanted to highlight. I don't know whether this video will play. So this is the dilatation that we are doing with the balloon. This is the second patient that we are doing. The video is of the second patient here. So you can see we are dilating him with the balloon. Gradually we are increasing. So we've started here with 12 millimeter balloon. So 12 millimeter pressure. Then gradually we've gone up to 13, and then we've stopped over here. So we maintain the pressure for some time, and then we again, but all the time we have to, every time we do dilatation, there is a risk that there is perforation, there is a risk of hypoxia that takes place. And this is when we've injected triamcinolone. So that is one advantage when we are doing endoscopically, that we can introduce these agents like triamcinolone and mitomycin. So from the stricture point of view, corrosive or anastomotic strictures, we prefer to do endoscopic dilatation. And there is a role of intrasite injection of triamcinolone or mitomycin C. Number of sessions that you would require varies, and caution is needed to prevent perforation. Thank you.